All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our second online lecture. And what we're going to do today is talk about a number of issues related to the historical context of the emergence of sociology. And the starting point is the fact that sociology was born largely in response to tremendous economic, political, and social changes and upheavals that came about as largely European societies transitioned from a feudal order to an industrial one, or from feudal society to industrial society. And these changes were taking place in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so sociologists didn't emerge kind of randomly or out of the blue, but largely in response to people were looking out their windows and seeing all this change going on and trying to basically figure it out. And that figuring out of kind of what's going on in the world, that prompted the development of sociology as a distinct academic discipline. So before we talk about what these changes were and the consequences that they had, and then how various social thinkers responded to them, we at least want to get a general sense of who the kind of the founding figures were in sociology. And then once we have that, we'll kind of go back and look at the conditions of feudalism. And this will set us up for talking about the changes that we see largely as a result of the Industrial Revolution, political revolutions, colonialism, and those kinds of things. So the starting point here is that social thought has probably been around as long as there's been people. This is certainly true for the ancient Greeks, ancient Islamic empires, ancient Chinese empires, ancient Japanese empires, and probably lots of other societies too, where we just don't have the historical record to document this. So thinking socially or sociologically, at least in the loose sense of the term, has probably been around forever. It's not new. But the term sociology and the idea that it's going to convey the formal science of study in society, that does date to a specific place. It's of French origins, and credit for coming up with the term sociology and for coining the term sociology goes to Comte. And this is Comte here, and Comte was a French social theorist. He coined the term sociology in 1838. Now, as the A&E note, previously he had called what we know now as sociology, he referred to it as social physics, but then changed the phrase to sociology, meaning ology meaning the study of, soci referring to society, so the study of society. What they fail to mention is why he made that change, and this speaks more to his personality than anything. But originally, Comte was using the phrase social physics. Then someone else, I believe it was a Swiss theorist, started using that term as well. And Comte was so offended, personally affronted, that someone else would use, but he would think hijack his term, that he abandoned social physics and then came up with this new phrase, sociology, to encompass what he was doing, because it's in his mind, he's creating this whole new way of understanding the world, and anyone else who's kind of like interfering with that and meddling with that is basically kind of polluting his thought and his brilliance. And this personality trait is also reflected in the fact that over time he came to practice what is known as cerebral hygiene, which is basically trying to keep his mind clean and free of, again, kind of like bad thoughts. And what this meant in practice is that he stopped reading the works of other people and just kind of focused on his own thinking, which as a practical matter is a really terrible idea, because people tend to learn best by having a whole bunch of different sources of information and trying to make sense of them. But nevertheless, Comte thought that he was so brilliant that, again, if he even read the work of someone else, that would just make him dumber as a result. So Comte does not suffer from a lack of an ego for sure. So Comte doesn't have much relevance today, aside from being famous for coining the term sociology. Like, there's not a lot of Comtean people out there anymore. But he does have a very interesting legacy, again, beyond just being the person who coined the term sociology. And so if you've seen the Brazilian flag, you know it's got this little slogan on here, Ordeum e Progresso, and that's Portuguese for order and progress. And order and progress was really kind of key themes of Comte and his thought. But it's worth noting that originally when Comte developed the idea of sociology, it was supposed to be a very scientific and very empirically based science of society. Again, like as the way similar to how physicists study the physical world, sociologists were going to study the social world in an analogous manner. But over time, Comte became kind of like a cult-like figure and had cult-like followers, and his view of sociology kind of moved in this kind of religious direction where he thought that sociologists should be the rulers of the world. And he kind of imagined that the sociological priests who would be the people that would guide social development from here on out. You know, kind of like the world was chaos before, but now that we have these sociologists in charge, we can have order and progress. Now, again, not surprisingly, he thought the first person that was qualified to be this kind of like sociological priest was himself. And so we can see Comte kind of goes off the rails a little bit as he gets older, but nevertheless, he's got a cult-like following. Some of his followers end up in Brazil, and then they were able to influence the Brazilian government to put this phrase, again, this kind of like this encapsulation of Comte's thought, order and progress, onto the Brazilian flag. So just kind of a neat little piece of sociological trivia. So Comte does play a key role in founding at least the idea of sociology, but in the French context, the person that really spearheads this effort and really establishes sociology as a distinct intellectual discipline and with a distinct outlook is Emile Durkheim. And this is Emile. People are often tempted when they see his name to think he's Emily, but he's Emile. He's male. All right. And he is famous because he was the first person to hold a formal position in sociology in not just France, but Europe as a whole. And this comes about in 1913. So he had been intellectually influential before this, but he held positions in departments of education. And over time, he was able to get it so that they would basically found or establish what we would consider a department of sociology. And as we'll see, since we're reading Durkheim, Durkheim continues to be influential in modern sociological thought. There are people who are Durkheimians, or at least people who pick up on some key ideas that Durkheim put forward. All right, if we go across the pond, as people say, over to England, there's kind of two founding figures here. One is Harriet Martineau, and that's her there. And the other, and Martineau is famous for being a political economist. We would just call her an economist these days, so interested in economic systems. And she's also famous for translating Comte's work into English and kind of spreading his influence into the English-speaking world. The other figure is this gentleman here. This is Herbert Spencer. And he's what we would call libertarian theorist today. And He was pretty influential in the 18 and 1900s. He had a legacy, at least in the early part of American sociology. But perhaps today he's most famous for the fact that he coined the phrase survival of the fittest before Darwin used it and before Darwin was thinking in these kind of evolutionary terms. And so Spencer had coined this term. Darwin is then coming up with his works. Spencer is running in the same circles with Darwin and basically badgered Darwin to adopt this phrase of survival of the fittest to apply it to Darwin's own work in evolution. And the reason for this is Spencer is what we would consider to be a social Darwinist, in that he kind of thought we should have a very laissez-faire, hands-off economic system, and then we'll just let the quote-unquote the fittest survive. And so if people prosper under the system, that means they're the fittest and they deserve the rewards they get. And if people don't survive, so be it. Now, another interesting kind of biographical aspect of Spencer is that as he grew older, he increasingly saw other people as being bothersome to him and was annoyed by them. And so he's the quintessential, like, get off my yard kind of old man. And the aspect that I think is so interesting with this is that when he had to go out in public in his later years, because other people annoyed him so much, he would actually stuff wax in his ears. In fact, they created like earplugs, so you didn't have to hear other people and be annoyed by them. Which again, I think is just an interesting tidbit about, and maybe gives us some insight into his personality. All right. What we'll do now is